Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. Today I'm going to show you how to make a great stash buster cowl. It's become one of my favorite patterns. There's no ends to weave in because I leave a fringe, a tassel, and join it together. And what I'm going to talk about here a little bit is how to combine yarns in an effective, to layer them effectively without spinning them together. I'm just going to hold a strand at a time. And all of these cowls are basically made the same way. They're all in seed stitch, but how many stitches I put on, how much length you need, and of yarn for each, length of each yarn, and how wide you want it to be will depend on your choice, and the size of pipe, depending on how many strands. So let me just show you some examples. So this first one is made with only 10 stitches. Okay, you can easily make that on the new pipe stand or anything else you have. Now, I used 5 strands all together, and I knit for 40 rows, and I used the 1/2 inch pipe for this. Each strand was only 50 yards, and I combined a bunch of different alpacas and a little kind of a crummy cotton yarn. It's hard to see in there. You'll notice that this has a bumpy edge. I'd like to point that out because I did not do a chain edge on this. But this is what it looks like when it's on, just to give you an idea of the height of the scarf. Now, if you make it too dense, it's going to stand up too far. I like it to push down a bit, and I like to have my braid where I join it on the outside, and I didn't weave in any tails. What you see is the beginning and the end where I cast on and cast off. So you want to cast on to one side, cast off on the other, so all your tails will end up on one side. And I'll show you how to do that in the next video. So this is what it is when you put 10 stitches on, and it was only 50 yards I used for each strand. Now, if your strands are shorter than that, maybe you're working from a couple of skeins, you can do a Russian join. But when you're doing a scarf like this, it's better to be kind of consistent throughout so that each of those 5 strands, even if they're different from one another, are the same through the scarf. Here's another example. And this one is 18 stitches. It's one of the widest, so if you make it on the scarf set, you'll have to push them tight. This was a scarf I didn't like, or a yarn I didn't like. It's a Bernat Viva, and I didn't like the texture of the color. It just seemed too plain. But with this little bit of a singles, which is a mohair that I got in one of those just bags of yarn, and you can see alone, neither one are too exciting, but adding that bit of alpaca in there adds a little bit of hairiness and changes the texture a little bit, and it gives it more depth. And again, I did it the same way with the tassel. Now that's 18 stitches, so it's considerably wider, but I used the 19 pipe, and I need 70 yards of each strand to do this one. So I used the US 19. I did not make a chain edge. It's 18 stitches, and I'll show you how wide it is. And again, this has a little bit more drape, so it's just like this. I like to wear my little thing in the front. I have no idea what this is looking like, but you're getting the idea. It's easy to kind of arrange something like that. Now, sometimes, and again, how I started this was I went through all my yarn, and I took out, not the woolies and things like that I had full skeins of, but I filled this basket, by the way. This was almost up to the top with skeins of yarn that were greens and some that were greenish blues, including this. And then that was my palette to work with. I filled the whole thing up with all my extra yarn. And then I went through things and started pulling things together. And you'll be surprised at how the combinations come out when you're goofing around like that. For instance, I really like how this turned out. Now I put a chain edge on that. This was done on the pipe that's equivalent to a US 35 needle. So it's the Schedule 40 pipe. It's 12 stitches. I did a chain edge because otherwise you have a real bumpy edge. The thicker your strand of yarn, in this case I'm working with, how many pieces did I use of this? I did 6 strands, and let me show you what's in this. Did I tell you it was 12 stitches, including the chain edge, and this took almost an hour and a half is what they take. This little short one, the one was only 10 stitches, this only took me an hour, including casting on and doing this little tassel thing. So it's a quick little project. Anyway, what I had for this scarf was I took 1 strand of each of these weird, I had a bunch of these in a bag, you know, you got when they don't sell them like that anymore at the craft store. You get the bag of mismatched, you know, I think they're mill ends, basically. So it was 1 strand, so 3 strands of this, a strand of this boucle that had some of the darker elements that was in this, and it was 1 strand of this angel hair, which is fuzzy yarn. It's real soft, it's acrylic. I'm getting rid of all my acrylic yarn. But anyway, 1 strand of that, and then 1 strand of this kind of weird eyelashy stuff. And you would say to yourself, that's kind of ugly by itself, but once you combine them, it's a totally different look. I think that turned out really pretty. Now, how many strands you have will probably determine, you know, your pipe size. This is another example. This is 6 strands held together, and I used 14 stitches. This is 14 stitches wide. I didn't do a chain edge, so you can see that creates a kind of a bumpy edge where you make your first stitch, but 14 stitches on 1/2 inch pipe. That's the schedule 40 pipe. And, you know, I knit till they're about 24 inches wide. These are going to stretch a little bit, and they're going to shorten a little bit. And, but unlike our stockinette scarves, if you remember those, when we do a stockinette scarf, we lose a lot of our width, remember, because it rolls. And I've learned now, after you've worn these a couple of times, they'll curl so much you might as well double the number of stitches you put on in the first place. You don't have to do that when you're working with seed stitch, which is one of the things I love about seed stitch. It's reversible, and it shows off all the texture that are in the yarns themselves. So it's an illusion that by holding your yarns together, you're basically creating a new yarn. So this was 1 strand of this light green boucle, a strand of a Z-twist singles alpaca wool yarn, and this very strange nubby gray and turquoise, I guess you'd almost call that a boucle, and this really weird green stuff I've had for years. This was pretty. This was that Colorscape, I think it's called, by Lion Brand. And 1 strand of this weird mohair with the confetti on it. By the way, if you've never worked with mohair, this, I'm allergic. I wouldn't say I'm allergic to it. I don't like it next to my skin. But when it's combined with other yarns, that helps soften that effect. And something like mohair can really blow out the diameter of the yarn you're working with. So, when you're going to sit down to create a piece, and we'll do that in our little bin over here, you want to start just start putting things together, layering them into your hand, so that you can kind of get an idea. And you can even twist these just together a little bit. If one of those really stands out, it's probably not the right yarn and you don't want it in there. Let me show you an example. This scarf right here was done with a Navajo plied boucle and 1 strand of a Z-twist singles. It's a partially wool yarn, and notice how that purple strand really jumps out, or maybe it's a cobalt blue, whatever you call this, okay? It almost doesn't work, and I kept it in there because the boucle was so strong, and there was a lot of it in there, but sometimes that can fool you. If you look at the boucle itself, you'll say, well, there's a lot of this shade. in there. But when you knit it up, that purpley blue really stands out. I'm not sure I like that as well. To me, it's not as effective. Let's put it that way. So, when you begin, you want to make sure that you don't, whoops, oh well, I'll get that later. You want to make sure that you do not wind them together first until, you know, I never wind them together anyway, even as I'm knitting. But you don't want to go very far, and I would suggest that whenever you're going to do a piece, let's say you know you want your, or you think you'd like your scarf 14 stitches across, okay? But you don't put all 14 on to begin with. It's better to do a little test swatch and see how they're going to look. So let's say, for example, let me get my thing here. So now I'm going to get down into my box because this is all I have left now. So I've got this in here, and I've got some of these. I've got some of that and that. Notice things are less matched now. I have a little ball of this that I used in another scarf. You get the idea, okay? I've got some eyelash in here. Now, there are some things I'm saying don't put in your cowl. One would be something that's big and wide, like your Woolies Thick and Quick, and your eyelash, because it will dominate and it won't look right. You're going to save these though, because our next project, Stash Buster Scarf, is this. Something like this, okay? I did a bunch of these last year at Christmas, and this is made with the weirdest combinations. I have Woolies Thick and Quick in here. I have some kind of lousy acrylic worsted. I have, whoops, I have some eyelash, but notice I only did the eyelash in a couple of spots. I combined it with the woolies, okay, in that row. And we'll do this. This is knitted vertically, if you will, on real long pipes. There's a little bit of Sheepish, some Hometown USA. You get the idea. So the strands that don't combine nicely for your cowl will look really cool in your Stash Buster vertical scarf. And we'll do this in garter stitch on long pipes. That'll be 2 videos from now. But in the meantime, we're just going to do this. And like I said, you are going to look at your yarns. Now I've made a big mess. I told you it's a big mess. And let's get that out of the way. Like I say, we won't use it in this. And as you begin, and I kind of had these out once, all these yarns, and I think I wound up with a couple strands of these and a couple of these, and I think that was so I had a strand of mohair, and I did 3 strands of this weird gray and turquoise stuff, which again, if you look at it on the table, it's kind of ugly. But it becomes something else. It's greater than the sum of its parts. And now remember, by the way, these things that are like this, they will grab and twist. You always want to kind of make sure you've combed those out behind them. And I believe I had a strand of this, but we'll just put it in and see what we think. And turn it a bit in your hand. You say, well, you know, I kind of like that. Well, don't just guess. So get your stand around here and say to yourself, well, you put on about 6 stitches. And it doesn't have to be fancy. By the way, if you were going to chain edge, and we'll do this in the next video, if you're going to do a chain edge, I suggest you don't do a slip knot. Just do your counterclockwise twist, full twist and a half, to put on your pipe, and then, you know, put on 4 stitches and see how they look, because that'll give you a better idea. And again, do not twist your yarns together. You'll have them down on the floor in separate bins, There's 4. Sometimes that's enough. We're just doing this a quick little video. And then the next video, I'll refresh your memory about how to do seed stitch. So there's 5. Let's do one more. And we'll knit those up. We've done 6 there. We'll knit those up. Already you can get some idea of how those are going to combine. If you do not like something, if one of those colors really jumped out, and again, they do not have to be exact match. Sometimes that little bit of argument between a tone, you know, this is almost a purplish and the green. It adds some depth and complexity to the color. If your eye tells you, that's no good, trust your eye. If it says, hey, I like that, that's good enough. You know, don't overthink it and make it the right size. That's another reason you're going to do this little test before you put on your clips and all that other thing. And we'll do that in the next video real quick, and I'll show you. Because if you are really going to make the cowl, remember, we got to put our little clips on there. And that's where we'll start in the next video. Thanks for watching.